Hello everyone. So today we'll talk about an important topic, which is threat hunting, the proactive approach in hunting for threats in cybersecurity from reactive to proactive. We already know that the reactive approach, which is incident response, you're waiting for the alert to escalate the alert so that the incident response team can, you know, investigate it. However, with threat hunting, it is more of a proactive approach. So we'll first start by defining what threat hunting is. So threat hunting, in short, is the pursuit of anomalies and hidden threats within an organization, aiming to neutralize the malicious activities before it occurs. So what's the purpose of threat hunting? Actually, it's just you are finding or looking for the threats that tools, security tools like SIEMs and EDR might miss. So why SIEMs and EDR, XDR might miss threats? Because it can be caused by misconfiguration. Maybe attackers are employing new techniques that can bypass the EDR, XDR controls, right? So the core concept of threat hunting is that don't wait for an alert from your security tools. Instead, actively delve into the telemetry, firewall logs, host logs, process logs, and looks for the anomalous activity. Right? So threat hunting is just more than just discovering a threat. It's about detection, refinement, and threat intelligence enhancement. Why? Because when you're hunting for threats, you found something, right? And then what's next is that you will create a detection rule for this threat, right? And this is the job of detection engineers. Where what when then that's when it comes into play to with threat hunting. So why is threat hunting important? So there are many benefits of threat hunting, but the major one is it's first reduce the dwell time, which is the time in detecting the attacker which is inside your network, right? Because many companies are already compromised, but they just don't know they are compromised. So it reduces the time to detect the attacker, right? Secondly, it's important in learning and adapting from threat actor behavior. It's important to mitigate damage from unknown threats because you're hunting for threats that are not not highlighted by your security controls, and it's finally strengthen the organizational resilience. So these are all benefits of implying a threat hunting system in your organization. So let's come, for example, take the cyber kill chain. So the cyber kill chain is like the steps an adversary takes in order to hack into or compromise an organization, right? So a threat actor cannot simply just go here, the steps. He have to follow a series of steps in order to compromise your system or your directory or your any kind of system you have. So you will first go through reconnaissance, will make some scanning, then weaponization. Use the tool after he identify some after scanning he might identify a new vulnerability, so he will create the tools. He will look for payloads that can be successful, then deliver exploitation. Anyway, so the goal of threat hunting is that to catch the adversary before reaching to this point, which is action on objective, which is the impact stage where he can cause damage. So due to threat hunting, you might catch the attacker in this step or in this step, in this step, right? So that's the importance of threat hunting actually, because it's important to reduce the dwell time, catching the attacker before going to the next step. So there are many types of threat hunting, but the main one are the three ones, which is hypothesis driven, IUC based hunting, and TTP based hunting. So in hypothesis driven hunting, it is just based on the premise or educated assumption about a possible adversarial behavior, right? You're just here making an assumption. There's no attack that is, or alert that is, you know, that came from security tools. You're just hypothesizing that there might be an attack. So this hypothesis might draw from something you read, maybe threat intelligence report, sector specific attack. Let's say you're in the telecom industry and you heard that your competitor got some kind of attack. So that might hit you as well, right? So it can be organizational change or emerging threat. So this is just a core premise of hypothesis that driven hunting, that you have a premise or educated assumption. So let's look at a case. For example, here we have a case for hypothesis hunting case. So let's say Bank of America received intelligence suggesting a new APT group is using custom PowerShell script for data exfiltration, right? So let's say you are in the financial sector as well, right? You have your competitor or your another bank received, you know, an intelligence that they are being targeted by an APT using a PowerShell script. So what will you do? What will you assume as a threat hunter? You'll assume that there's might involve, you know, you're searching for unusual PowerShell activity or command line pattern associated with credential and data staging, right? So what will you do as the threat hunter? Will use leverage security tools like EDR, Seams, maybe Splunk, QRadar, anyway, any security tool, and started, you know, making or structuring a query to look for, you know, suspicious PowerShell scripts, right? So you'll run it across your environment to look for any suspicious PowerShell script, right? So that's how hunting, hypothesis hunting work. Actually, you make an assumption, right? Next is IOC based hunting, which is also one of the most common type of hunting, which is like a reactive evidence-led approach focusing on the detection of known artifacts within the environment, right? So in IOC-based hunting, it's based on previous incidents, right? In previous evidences, like maybe a previous company has been targeted, right? So what you will do here, you'll use the artifacts that was found in that incident and you'll scan it against your environment. Why? Because there might be some hits in your environment, right? So what in IOC is actually indicator of compromise, right? So what is included in IOC based hunting? You have file hashes, non-malicious file hashes used in previous incidents, IP addresses, domains, email addresses, and URLs. And these are all used by attackers actually. So for example, you can here just have a simple picture showing, for example, you have network based IOCs, you have IP addresses, domains, unusual traffic patterns. So what you can do, you can, let's say you have a list of malicious IP addresses and domains, you can scan it in your environment for a, let's say, 3 months period, 4 months scan period in Splunk or in any tool you use, right? And look if there is any hits. If there is hits, you must investigate because this IP address is associated with the previous incident, right? Same as file hash, same as attachments, and so on. The problem with IFC based hunting, which is this kind of hunting, is it is like temporarily or used temporarily, because attackers, what they often use, they change their infrastructure. Yeah. So an attacker might use an IP and later he will use another IP, right? He might be using a tool and maybe he will change the tool, right? So you be using a domain for his malicious activities, but since he was detected, he might use the another domain. So that's the disadvantage of IOC based hunting, that it is only used like for a short period of time, because attackers are, you know, creative, so they will not use the same IP for the same activity or to the same attack, you know. But it's just a good, you know, temporary method. But the final one is the best way of hunting, which is TTP, or tactics, techniques, and procedure based hunting. So this technique is an advanced approach that emphasizes the detection of threat actors using the tactics, techniques, and procedures used by that specific actors, right? So the most common used framework in relation to this TTP is the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which is used to map the hunt for the used to map like the tactics, techniques, procedures to the specific, let's say, APT or threat actor. And this is important because it's not like IOC based hunting, because in IOC based hunting, an attackers can easily change the way, you know, their IP addresses, the artifacts. So but in here in DTP, you are chasing the behavior of the threat actor, so it is really hard for the attackers to change their behavior, right? Because, you know, every threat actor have a specific behavior when they attack. First, let's say let's say a threat actor is use, you know, he's well known, you know, he first scan for, let's say, VPN portals, firewall portals. So it's hard to change this behavior when, like, let's say, scanning for things, right? So that's how, you know, behavior or TTP based hunting works. So for instance, so here For instance, you can look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework website. You have the matrices, the enterprise, the mobile, the ICS industrial control system. Usually we only focus at the enterprise level, right? And you can see here the techniques first, the tactics. These are all tactics: reconnaissance, research development, initial access, execution, and these are all the techniques. And there's also the sub techniques. So we can go to the site actually. We can see this is the site, the MITRE ATT&CK framework. We have matrices, tactics, techniques. But for example, let's say we choose enterprise, and you can see all these are all the tactics or the goals: initial access, execution, persistence. You can look at this. This is the techniques used by each tactic, and below it, if you press here, you'll find the sub techniques used by each sub technique, right? So the sub techniques are like the procedures or the ways how this attack is conducted, right? So back to our presentation. Okay, full screen. So here is a case for a TTP based hunting, as we have seen with IUC and hypothesis. So let's say, for example, in the past, the technology firm initiated a proactive threat hunting exercise after detecting an unusual spike in failed logins across the domain controllers, right? So there's high number of login failures. So utilizing the MITRE ATT&CK framework, the team focused on identifying TTPs associated with lateral movement, particularly use of administrative share and remote services, right? So here they are hunting for TTPs related to the lateral movement. So we can do the similar approach, right? We can just, you can see the approach that they used, that the team extracted the logs from window event logs and network monitoring, and they are what they created a detection rule for, first of all, successive login authentication, which is monitored by event code 4624, and also 5140, right? Access share object, because if an admin or a user trying to access a shared object or a file, he can monitor it from this event ID. So you as the threat hunter, you can create a query in any SIEM you use or KQL. Let's say if you are using EDR, you can combine these two event codes and look for any kind of similar, any kind of interesting pattern. So let's do it now. So you can go to this MITRE ATT&CK framework, as the case said, we are hunting for lateral movement. Yeah, so this is lateral movement, and we are focusing on techniques related to administrative shares, right? Here it says administrative and remote services. So what you can do, you can scroll down and look for a remote service. Yeah, you can see remote services, and we can click on it. This is the technique we are hunting for, right? You can see it have several sub techniques. However, we are looking for here for window admin shares, right? So this is what the team is actually hunting for. So you can read, everything about the sub techniques, the procedures, the APTs or threat actors that use these sub techniques. You can scroll down, you can look at the mitigations. How can you mitigate this threat or these techniques, and detection strategy, right? So this is the most important part. So how can you detect this kind of attacks, right? So it's in our case, we combined successful authentication, because lateral movement, after the attacker gain access, he will move laterally across the environment to different hosts in order to look for the domain controller or look for a specific high target privilege. Yeah, so here it says, for example, SMB based remote file share allow followed by lateral movement actions such as remote service creation, task scheduling, suspicious process execution, host using admin, and C shares. Yeah, so this is actually monitored by this event code, as we have already seen. Let's open this in full screen, which is 5140. So this is a simple threat hunting methodology you can use. Just a simple picture. We have preparation, hypothesis development, data collection, analysis, investigation and validation, and response documentation. So this is just a core or brief concept of threat hunting that you can apply in your organization, and these are also the types of threat hunting we have seen. So hope you enjoyed the presentation. See you in the next one.